All right. Well, good morning. Thank you for joining us today for San Antonio Entrepreneurship Week. I'm extremely happy and proud to have CPA Bryan Potts, the CEO of the CFO to Go, the founder and visionary behind it. Bryan has been a mentor with our Launch SA community for, almost since the inception, I believe, about 7 years ago. With keen insight towards the financials, the accounting, and the other essentials that make up the operations of your business. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, when business was going as well as it could go, or a little bit prior to that, most people probably weren't taking as keen of an eye to their financial setting as before, but because of the pandemic, many of us had to figure out how to lean out, how to scrape by, to figure out what we were going to do to survive. And so I was really keen on having Bryan talk to us today about some of the lessons learned from this pandemic, especially as they relate to the financial capacity, the sustainability of our businesses. So Bryan, I'm extremely grateful that you've taken the time with us this morning. And I'm happy to pass it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be able to share some of my thoughts. The COVID-19 pandemic has been devastating. At least 600,000 people have died just in the U.S., 3.8 million in the world. Our global supply lines have been battered. Local businesses have been forced to shut. I don't know about you, but I sure didn't get a whole lot of sleep in the second half of March last year. My accounting practice, the CFO to Go, has a restaurant niche. We work with approximately 60 restaurants in various ways, either daily accounting to income taxes to consulting. Thankfully, restaurants aren't all we do, but it's certainly the majority of our clients. And on March 18th, 2020, when Mayor Nuremberg ordered the bars and restaurants to close their dining rooms, I knew I was in a lot of trouble. It was a bad time. Perhaps I wasn't going to be as much trouble as my restaurant clients, but I was honestly scared. I was scared for my health, scared for my family's health. I was scared for my employees' health and welfare. I was scared that my business would go bust. I was scared that my clients, who are also my friends, would go bust. And that was just when I was thinking locally. When I expanded my boundaries past our county, I wasn't sure what was going to happen to our state, our nation, our world. But I certainly couldn't fathom anything good happening. By the middle of May last year, the Washington Post reported that there had already been 100,000 small businesses that had closed forever. Initial estimates were that there would be 400,000 businesses closed permanently due to COVID. And I thought that estimate was pretty low. I had no doubt that the large corporations would make it. They have access to capital that the rest of us simply don't have. They have funds available through the stock market, through the banks, things like that. But there are approximately 22 million active businesses in the U.S., and 89% of those have less than 20 employees. These were the ones I was worried about. These companies employ about 17% of the total workforce. And they typically don't have cash reserves or open lines of credits to survive a shutdown of even 1 or 2 weeks. So what we're going to do when we're looking at an indefinite shutdown, thinking of my restaurant clients, I fully expected 75% to fail within the year. 75%. The restaurant business is a low margin industry, and most operators have cash flow concerns at some point during each and every month. Especially when payroll and payment of sales and mixed beverage tax hit on the same week. So how in the world were they going to go from fully operating to not bringing in any revenue and still having bills due, lease payments due, payroll taxes, all of that? It was daunting. And my concern for the economy wasn't any rosier. If the restaurants weren't bringing any money, how would all the affiliated industries survive? I'm talking about the produce vendors, the protein vendors, the cleaning crews, the landlords, the DJs and bands, and yes, even the humble CPA that thought he had a nice little niche carved out in his world. Allowing this tsunami to play out my mind, I saw a complete breakdown of our economy. If all these people were suddenly without jobs, how long would it take for society to start failing? If people couldn't pay rent, what would the landlords do? If the landlords couldn't make their mortgage payments, what would the banks do? If the banks fail, who's going to put money in the ATM machine so that the rest of us can grab some cash to buy food, clothes, whatever? You can obviously see why I was pretty sleepless. But thankfully, Zoom is working today. The power's on. So obviously my fears are overblown. It now appears that only 200,000 businesses will fail. How do we save half the businesses that are expected to close? I see two main reasons. First, the U.S. government has made almost $4 trillion available to us in the economy. They did this through PPP grants, supplements, through direct purchases, but $4 trillion, trillion with a T, that's a huge number. To put it in perspective, that's only slightly less than the GDP of Germany. And the German economy makes up about 4.4% of the world's total economy. So yes, there was a huge push there. Now, there's been a lot of people that have criticized this, saying it wasn't all necessary. Was it necessary? You betcha. Without that injection of capital, I think my scorched earth view would have come to fruition. Was all this money spent properly? No. No, there were abuses, but there was a race to inject the capital into the economy. It was urgent, and mistakes were made. Some of the companies that got the PPP actually boomed. They had the best year they've ever had, yet they still received forgivable PPPs. And I'm not saying anything bad about that. They didn't do anything nefarious. They followed the rules and qualified for the funds, so I can't blame them. And I'm not going to blame the politicians either, because they were trying to do everything they could to keep the economy from melting down. So I think that's just sort of the cost of an emergency and acting quickly. But the second reason that I think that our economy didn't collapse was because of small business. Small businesses employ over half of all the employees in the U.S. And I think that the way that we reacted really helped us an awful lot. So I thought we ought to take a look at some of the lessons that we learned and see what we can do, take that into our own personal businesses. Now, not all of these lessons will apply to you, and some of them are going to seem contradictory, but that doesn't make the lesson wrong. It simply means that different companies and industries have different constraints or abilities or opportunities. So I've tried to break these down into 4 major categories: business models and execution, employees, capital, and technology. So looking at the business models, the first lesson that I think we can learn is be nimble, be quick. Good old Jack, be nimble, be quick. The market had made a dramatic shift. All of a sudden, you went from fully operational to zero operational or half operational. And so your company had to make that shift too. And how do you do that? Well, the first thing you have to do is take an inventory of your company's capabilities and determine if you can redeploy those capabilities. I'll draw on some of my experience with restaurants, but we can apply this to other industries as well. Several of my restaurateurs inventoried their assets and capabilities early, and they said, they'd just been forced to close their dining rooms. They looked around, and the grocery store shelves were empty. There was a massive run on toilet paper, on tortillas, on flour, sugar, just the basics. And the restaurateurs realized that not only did they have food items, they also had cleaning supplies, toilet paper, etc. And they had access to the distributors like Cisco. And Cisco and Benny Keith and those suddenly had an excess inventory of all this product because restaurants weren't buying it. And so some of the creative restaurateurs decided that they would become a little mini grocery store. They started buying sugar and flour in bulk and repackaging it into 1 and 2 pound baggies. They ordered all their supplies and broke everything down. And it was a savior. I mean, a lot of people that was the only way they could get some of these supplies. But once the shelves were full at HEB, they pivoted to another opportunity. I'm going to lean on local restaurateur Johnny Hernandez of La Gloria fame. He shifted several times. He started out with a little tienda in La Gloria, and then rode that out. And then the next thing he knew was he could serve meals to people. They were very good at serving a lot of people food. But if he couldn't do that in a limited seating restaurant, where else could he feed people? And his first thought was Meals on Wheels. He contacted Meals on Wheels and asked if he could be of assistance, and ended up contracting with them to prepare and package meals and deliver it to seniors. He didn't do the delivery, he did the prepare and package. And this was just a win-win. Johnny was able to keep his kitchen crew employed, keep things rolling, keep money flowing through the company. And the seniors that are the recipients of the Meals on Wheels all of a sudden had a remarkable improvement in the flavor of their meals. He also started thinking about where people get their meals other than that, just the rank and file people. And, he realized that in today's society, an awful lot of us simply don't cook. We may say we cook, but that's more reheat something than cook. So he thought, shoot, I can make heat and eat meals for HEB. And sure enough, he ended up with some good quality food on the heat and eat section of HEB. So congrats to HEB for being willing to, and congrats to Johnny for making it happen. On a sort of a personal note, how I had to pivot. When I was laying in bed staring at the ceiling trying to determine what I was going to do when 60% of my business was about to disappear, I thought about the capacity of my team. Detail-oriented, comply with technical rules and regulations. We had the ability to assist clients understand complex financial transactions, et cetera. So one night, it was about 1:30 in the morning. I was scrolling through headlines on my phone, and I saw reference to potential legislation that would lend billions of dollars to small businesses. Intrigued me. So I started researching and found the actual text of the PPP bill that was in front of the House at the time. I stayed up all night reading the entire bill, and by 6 in the morning, I had a plan that not only would save most of my clients, it would save me. I knew that with my capabilities, we could handle the PPP loan applications. So I pitched my plan to several banks. I would prepare and bundle the PPP loan applications for my clients and present them to the bank in a ready to process format, ready to go. It would save the bank countless hours trying to get the specific information. They wouldn't have to deal directly with the clients and follow up and get additional information. That would be my job. It would introduce to the bank potential new customers. I knew my clients couldn't pay for my services. So instead, I asked the bank to pay me a commission on all the loans that were funded. And this was tolerable to the bank because they were getting commission for processing loans. So as long as there was enough meat on the bones for both of us, it was a no-lose deal. We ended up securing 53 PPP loans. And without that, I think probably 48 of the companies wouldn't be here today if it weren't for PPP loans. So it was a wonderful thing. Another example, an HR consulting company that I know, all of a sudden found that the existing clients weren't hiring new employees, and new clients were nowhere to be found. She surveyed her team skill set, looked for areas that needed those skills, and she realized that they are experts when it comes to payroll data, and that every one of those PPP loans would need very specific and accurate payroll reports in order to qualify for forgiveness. She began marketing that service and soon was busy. So I think the lesson there is, agility is more than innovation. It's important to be comfortable with change and willing to change directions even while you're making those changes. The next is diversify. And I'm going to say the lesson is diversify or die, or diversify to die. I've read an awful lot of articles touting the need to diversify in order to survive the pandemic. Personally, I don't believe that. I think as a small business, you try to diversify. If you try to diversify, you're just diluting your company's resources across too many channels. Warren Buffett said diversification is a protection against ignorance. It makes very little sense for those who know what they are doing. And there's a fine line between being nimble and diversification. Diversification to me means operating in completely different industries. For example, if you were one company and you were trying to run a restaurant, an insurance agency, and maybe a construction company, thinking that if one of those industries struggles, the other one will flourish and be able to pull everything along. And in 2020, the restaurant would have struggled, the insurance agency probably would have broken even, and the construction company would have had a record year. But I think it's, I think that's diluting that small business too much. And yeah, it's a little bit ironic that Warren Buffett would say that diversification doesn't make sense for those who know what they're doing, considering that Berkshire Hathaway is the epitome of diversification. They have investments in hundreds, if not thousands, of companies in almost every industry. But I think what he's saying is it's okay to invest in different industries, but that an operating company should stay in its own lane. If you really have an interest in restaurant, insurance agency, and a construction company, you need a separate entity for each of those with separate management, and that would be okay. Just don't try to make the insurance agency sell breakfast tacos as a bad example. One more quote from Buffett. He said, "Diversification may preserve wealth, but concentration builds wealth." And that sort of leads us to the next lesson, which is cut the clutter. In the late 1800s, there was an Italian economist named Pareto, and he noted that 80% of the outcome comes from 20% of the causes. Today, we know that principle is the 80-20 rule, or the 80-20 principle. And it's pretty easy to see that in action in sales, where 80% of your sales are generated by 20% of the items. So if this is so, why do we keep all those items? And I think during the pandemic, a lot of people realized that in order to survive, they needed to make things simpler. They needed to get rid of all the clutter and focus on things. As restaurants have reopened, you've probably noticed that your favorite restaurant isn't offering the same menu they had before. It's not as long. Some of your favorite items might even be gone. And this is because the smart restaurateurs have applied the 80-20 principle and decided they're going to cut down their menu. And by doing so, become more profitable. They'd have less waste. Slow selling items take up space. The cost of inventory, they go stale, they go bad, have to be thrown out. If you have an easier menu, you're also making the kitchen's jobs easier, so that you don't require as much skill or as many people or as many hours, and you can get the food out faster, allowing for much more revenue per hour. So I think we all should look at the 80-20 and see if there are some items that we're carrying around just because we personally like them or we think that we have to have them. But if they're not contributing much to the benefit of the company, it might be time to pare back a little bit. Our next lesson is lose your principles and keep the doors open. There are celebrity chefs that are famous for saying nothing but perfection leaves their kitchen. They're insistent on using the highest grade quality, this, that, the other. If they can't find this specific caviar to put on top of the entree, they just won't sell the entree. Those are high and mighty principles. But I think what they figured out during the pandemic was forget the principles. We gotta have some money coming in here. Let's do whatever we can to generate some cash. And for that reason, you've seen some noted celebrity chefs opening hamburger stands and barbecue joints and things like that. The emphasis here is in pandemic, you do anything you can to keep revenue, i.e. cash, the lifeblood of your company, coming through the door. Sometimes you have to step back a little bit on your principles, but it's better to lose a couple principles and save your business. Our next lesson is crisis amplifies flaws. Little problems become big problems when the world's on fire. Probably I can explain this best by telling a little story about chicken wings. Everybody loves chicken wings, and the market is heavily influenced by large chains, the Wingstop, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of these larger companies, they're publicly traded, and their emphasis isn't necessarily on profit, it's on market growth. So they'll do anything they can just to keep sales increasing, adding new stores, whatever. But local businesses, local restaurants are all about profit. I mean, we can't really focus on market growth because we've got to be profitable. We don't have the capital resources of the stock market to fund everything. But because the big guys dominate, there seems to be a market cap on the menu price. And so that means that the menu price is our margin is really, really tight. Wings started out as this byproduct of a chicken breast. And it was almost something that's been thrown away. And someone decided, man, if I can make it real tasty, I've got a winner here. And they'd have all you can eat wing night, that kind of thing. Now, that doesn't happen anymore. Local leaders want to treat it like a loss leader, but they just simply can't do that. So when COVID hit, it really rattled the wing market. First, it shut down the poultry processing plants. You might have read some of those had the highest infection rates in the nation. And so without the processing plant being open, the chicken producers, the farmers, couldn't ship their chickens to the processing plant. And so they kept them in the barn and kept feeding them, which meant that the birds got bigger. As they got bigger, they outgrew the equipment in the slaughterhouse. A little gory here, but they were too big to effectively butcher. So that exasperated the shortage. Then wings are an easy to go item or easy delivery item. So as our market really expanded in those areas, there was huge demand for wings. So now we've got huge demand, a little shortage, and it created this havoc where we were just almost completely out of wings. This shortage created an increase in the cost of the wings. Pre-COVID, the price of wings was about $1.23 a pound. Now they're at all-time high, and they're hitting as high as $4.25 a pound. And you can't even buy them. I mean, if you've seen, HEB has limits on how many wings you can buy. And then compounding this all, making it bad right now, was when Snowvid hit in February. We had the bitter cold in Texas and elsewhere. And that shut down the chicken processing plants again. And that caused this supply demand issue to go upside down again, and costs went through the roof. So, one of my clients had just opened a new restaurant, and he was bragging about his food cost margins, how great he was doing. He said, he told me what he expected it to be, which was in the upper 20s. And when I ran the numbers, it was more like 70. And he was shocked. We started looking at it, and I saw wings on the menu. I said, uh-oh, what's going on here? As we dove into it, we found out that he was selling wings for $1 less than what they cost him. And that was their number one selling item. And so this is a big example of how a flaw in your pricing is just completely amplified when there is a crisis. Next lesson is practice makes perfect, but how perfect do you have to be? And this is something I think every transaction should have a purpose and be in pursuit of profitability. There's really no reason once you're established in business, everything you do needs to be geared towards making a profit. Oftentimes we feel compelled to have an artificial ceiling on our price, like we can't charge more than $9.99 for an order of wings. The thoughts being, if my competition charges this, I can't charge any more. But by not charging more and not making money on it, it leads us to doing the same thing over and over again and not making money on any of these transactions. So if you're just breaking even on the sale of one item, why do you keep doing it? I refer to this as practicing. You go through great effort and you don't accomplish anything. You're just practicing. There's no glory in practice. The saying goes, but without practice, there is no glory. Yeah. But there's no glory in practice. There's no money in practice either. So make a change. If you're doing something and you're not making money at it, either drop the item or increase the price. It's past time of practicing. And I'm not just talking about individual items. I'm thinking about overall too. In the restaurant industry, food costs should be somewhere between, say, 28 and 32%, depending on what type of operation you have. Many of my clients, their food costs are 2 to 5 points higher than where they need to be. And my discussion with them has always been, it's going to be difficult to hold on through the pandemic, and harder still to reopen on the other side in this new environment. Do you really want to go through all of that just to get by? If your food costs are 2 to 5% higher than they should be, you're probably just breaking even. So I said, don't do all this just for practice. Let's make it for a purpose. So take this opportunity to increase the prices. I'm probably the bad guy here. If you've noticed, your restaurant prices have gone up, but they have. Oh, all right, we're good. So anyway, I've encouraged restaurateurs to make sure that they're not gouging, but make sure that you're making money at this. Don't just do it for practice. If you raise your prices and there's pushback, then reevaluate and see if there's something else you can do. But just don't go happily along accepting break even. It's just not good, or break even, or even worse, losing. As a side note, I think that this also applies to employees. I think some of the employees are thinking, why do I want to work as hard as I have just to scratch out a living? It's simply just not worth it. I'll either find something different or change my lifestyle or something. Thinking of people like bussers or dishwashers making $8 an hour, they work the entire 40 hours a week and their take home is just a couple $100. At some point, I think they're going, I think I can do something different. I don't know what it is, but do I really want to put in all this for practice? Because I'm not making any money. And I think this is one of the factors that is contributing to some employers' inability to find employees. So employees leads us to our next set of lessons. And the first lesson I think we learned is employees aren't mushrooms. You can't keep them in the dark, feed them crap, and expect them to keep coming back. When restaurants were forced to close, each business had to inform their employees that they were without a job and all of that. I saw some good ways of handling this, and probably the worst thing I've ever seen. The worst was Jim's Restaurants sent out postcards to all their employees advising them that they'd been laid off indefinitely. Can you imagine? You're home, you're worried about your health, your welfare, and all that, and your employer, that many of you, they might have been there for 20 years, and they get a postcard telling them that they're laid off. Amazing. I mean, could have hosted a Zoom meeting or anything, a conference call, anything, but just so impersonable. And on the flip side of that, the best practice was probably from Terry Corliss with the Mad Dogs group. On the Wednesday before the mandatory Friday shutdown, he had an all hands meeting telling the employees that the governor was going to shut down the restaurant on Friday. He told them exactly when they would get their check. He paid them any accrued leave that they had, plus an additional 3 days. He realized that he had a kitchen full of inventory that was all going to go bad. So instead of just pitching it, he decided to make care packages. He realized that he didn't have enough to really do an adequate job of that. So he started placing orders with Cisco and Benny Keith, and so that he could, get a big box of staples of flour, sugar, noodles, pasta, cleaning supplies, everything they could. And each employee was giving a box to take home to help them during this unsettling times. They facilitated the unemployment claims, had the accounting staff work with every employee to make sure that their claim was accurate so there wouldn't be any delays, giving them their specific hire date, that kind of thing. They created I'm going to say blog, but that's not right. A shared social interaction space where the company interweb, where they were able to communicate and check on people. Terry would get on and tell people any updates that he had, just trying to keep everybody in the loop, understanding what's happening. Now, when it came time to reopen, which of these companies do you think had people coming back? And which one do you think probably lost a lot of employees permanently? Yeah, I think Mad Dogs did a pretty darn good job of keeping their employees in the loop. They told them exactly what was going on, didn't try and BS them, showed them compassion. And I think he's got some really dedicated employees now because of it. The second lesson that we learned here was that you know who your essential employees really are. If you ask most founders or C-level people who the essential employees are, they're going to say, well, heck, it's the management staff, because without us, nothing happens. I think the pandemic showed us that that's not right. When they started identifying essential employees, it was people like HEB checkers, the kitchen staff, the orderlies at the hospital, truck drivers, etc. They didn't say the regional manager was essential. No, not at all. It was the people on the front line. And I think as employers and as businesses, we need to keep that in mind. All employees are essential, and we need to treat them that way. Respect and care for all your employees in your organization, and your organization becomes stronger, better, and more unified. So this is one of my pet peeves, is people looking down on the functions of other people. Everybody's important. Without the dishwasher, how does the restaurant survive? That kind of thing. So I think they're all important, and we've got to make sure that we treat them that way. The next lesson is, how remote is too remote? A lot of people felt like pre-pandemic that you couldn't trust an employee to work from home. They'll never get anything done. They'll have distractions. They'll be playing with the dog all the time, blah, blah, blah. I think what we found was that actually a lot of employees actually have better quality work and are more productive from home. And we're seeing that as companies are trying to reopen. People don't want to come back to work. People don't want to come back to the office. They want to stay home. I know I've allowed my staff to stay at home. It's sort of up to them, whichever way they feel best. But for the most part, they say, why should I spend at least 30 minutes in traffic coming and going each day? That's an hour of my life that I'm not enjoying and not getting paid for. If I stay home, I can work my 8 hours and essentially have an extra hour of of personal time. And I'm okay with that. We've had some, we've had to adopt some different practices and things like that, but it's all worked out really well. And I'm now thinking, do I really need all this office space? Because the people that are working for me aren't sitting here every day. They don't need to. Maybe I can reduce some of the costs that I have and get less office space. But if remote's okay, then how remote is okay? Right now it's difficult to find an accountant. It's people that have a job are pretty hunkered down in it. The supply is pretty slow. The market's low. So if it's okay for someone to work from home 5 miles away from office, is it okay if they're 5,000 miles from the office? It's making me rethink, should I try to offshore some of this, and not means to save money, rather to access capabilities. The market for accountants in India is strong right now. They've got a lot of very qualified people that need work. If I can't find those resources locally, does it really bother me whether they're 5,000 miles away or 5 miles away? In fact, there are some great advantages of it. I mean, they're basically operating on the 12 hours of the day that we're not. So, they're getting things done while I'm sleeping, and I could wake up and have their work and review it, and just sort of makes it a 24-hour workday. Just something to think about anyway. Is how far is too far? Our next topic is capital. Like I said earlier, large companies have access to capital that small companies just don't. They've got banking relationships, they have lines of credit, they have tapped the stock market for capital, they have bonds, and they can lean on creditors and everything else. In the small business arena, we're pretty limited. And it's a mistake if you don't know your banker and know him personally. When the PPP loan was announced, many of the large banks said that they would only work with their existing clients. That was pretty self-serving. They had clients that had huge loans out to them, and they knew that if they didn't get the PPP, they would probably default on that loan. And so the large banks jumped out there and took care of those people first and left the rest of us sort of straggling. So my preference in a banking has always been local banks. I just don't think that Wells Fargo or Chase or anyone is going to be that worried about me or my business, where the Jeffersons, the Lone Star National Banks, the IBCs, those size banks, you can have a relationship and it makes a difference. If you don't already know the manager assigned to your bank account, do it now. Ask for a meeting and create a two-way relationship. Bankers are just humans. They don't all run around saying no, denied, no. So get to know your banker. It will make a big difference. Call if you don't know your manager already. Call, introduce yourself, ask for a meeting, maybe come to your office, but make it. When I say make it a two-way relationship, I mean show interest in the bank. Ask them about their size, what their capacity is. Ask to learn more about the other services they offer. In addition to commercial loans, do they offer investments like 401k or just savings and other stock investments, home mortgages, insurance, credit card processing. The more that you can put in, more of these services that you can take advantage of with one lender makes you more important to them. So don't think that if you're going to buy a house and get a home mortgage, talk to your business banker first. See if they can get it. He gets some brownie points from the home mortgage department. Then in your meeting, also tell the banker about your company. Provide a history. Give them your elevator speech plus. Talk about your goals and projections. And more importantly, talk about what the bank can do to assist you. If you know that you've got some growth coming up, now is the time to talk to the banker and try to plan for that. Waiting until you get the purchase order in hand and need to order more material than you've ever purchased before, it's too late for most banks. They want to get comfortable with you. So if you can say, look, I'm working on this project and hopefully in 6 months it'll be in the market. I expect to get a couple orders of X size. And you know what? I'm going to need some help financing that, because I know that when I get this purchase order, I'm going to have to buy raw materials. I'm going to have to produce it, and then I'm going to have to wait 30 days or more before I get paid for it. I'm going to need some capital to take care of this, and start planning with them, start setting it up, showing your financial statements to the banker. Keep in contact with them. They're salesmen too, so they want to hear what you have, and they want to be able to pitch your stuff. Make it all work together. Now, not all bankers are good. I'm going to tell you that. And I'm probably going to give you the bad bankers from bad to worse. A bad banker would be the mob. You know, you go to the mafia and borrow money, and you don't pay it back, they're going to break your leg. The second worst banker is probably these companies that buy your future credit card receipts. I don't know if you've seen this or not, but they'll go to a restaurant, and they'll say, all right, I will purchase $100,000 of your credit card receipts, future credit card receipts, for $65,000. So the restaurant gets $65,000 now, and then every day this bank takes a percent of your credit card receipts, and it's not exactly a small percent. It sounds so enticing to people because, man, that $65,000, I could pay off this, but all you're doing is creating this never-ending vicious cycle because you're not getting your full receipts. If they take 10% every day, that's your profit then some. And so by the time you finally pay off this loan that typically has interest rates well north of 30%, which is outrageous, you've now stretched all your vendors, not able to pay them because you're not getting all your credit card receipts. And so then you have to turn around and do another one of these loans. And that's why I call them heroin. I refer to these loans as heroin because you get a little bit, you just can't ever get off the stuff. It just keeps going and going and going. And then the absolute worst banker of all is the IRS. I can't tell you how many small businesses get in trouble because they think, oh, I need to pay this vendor and I need to pay the IRS. I'll pay this vendor and then I'll make up with the IRS later. And during COVID, our government even encouraged this. If you recall, they allowed you to defer payment of the employer's portion of payroll taxes, which is crazy. Why was it going to get any easier to pay that come January of 2021? And people are realizing it now. And so that was one of the programs I think the government really screwed up on, and we're just now starting to see some of that. But even without COVID, pay your payroll taxes. It's ugly when you don't, and the penalties and interest get up there so fast, so high, that it almost makes the heroin loans look cheap. One thing that we saw quickly in COVID was that there's good debt and bad debt. When COVID hit and your revenues were shrunk, you were all of a sudden, faced with a dilemma. Who do I pay and what do I do? Who gets paid this week? Who doesn't? A lot of the debt got deferred. Some with talking to the bank. Again, if you have a good relationship with your banker, a lot of my clients went to the bank and said, look, I've had to shut down. We're going to be shut down for 6 months. I need to defer my debt. And most banks agreed to that. They either just put those payments at the very end of the loan term, or they made it so that once they reopened, they could pay their normal monthly amount plus 1%, because they didn't want bad debt either. But what highlighted was that there's a lot of companies have bad debt. And I don't mean stuff that's not going to be collected. I mean bad reasoning debt. Good debt is debt that you use to expand or grow your business. You need a loan for a new delivery truck. You need loan for equipment. You need loan to open a second branch. Bad debt is that sports car that's in the owner's parking spot. I call it frivolous debt. Yeah, you got it, but it's pretty frivolous. Doesn't help the company that much or at all. And, why is it on there? And then in the crisis, that's the one that the bankers want you to pay without a doubt. They'll work with you on your mortgage. They're not going to work with you on the loan for your Porsche that's sitting out there in the parking lot. I guess my adage there is invest in your company, not yourself, and invest is also, take debt for your company and not for yourself. And that sort of leads into another one: separate your personal from your business. Too many times in small businesses, we see people using the company bank account as their personal checking account. And that caused problems, especially in the PPP, where we were monitoring what was being paid. There were restrictions on what those funds could be used for. And if you've been trying to live off of out of your company's bank account, you're probably in default on some of your PPP loans and the EIDL loans if you're paying personal expenses out of there. Don't wait for a crisis to decide to find religion on that and clean it up. Work it out now. Get all the personal stuff out of your business. If you pay yourself a wage or a distribution, but don't just write the checks for all your living expenses out of the company. First, it's required by the IRS. The IRS requires that you keep it separately. Second, it's just good business practice. How do you know what your break even is if your expenses include your groceries and your car, your personal auto loan and lunch every day, things like that. And then the final one was create a plan. I think that we saw this with the PPP, especially. Those that came through the pandemic with a PPP loan, the ones that were able to get the loan completely forgiven the quickest created a plan. They broke it down. We know that we have to spend 60% of this loan on payroll between this date range. And they would manipulate when somebody got paid, what happened, who got paid, had to reduce the pay on some and not on others. They knew that they could also spend the other 40 on just specific items, on mortgage, on rent, on utilities, those kind of things. And so you really created this budget, if you will, or a pro forma where everything was planned out on the specific dates. Create that plan and keep that same laser focus on your regular business. It's having a budget like that really helps, because as you start to slip away from it, you can make changes immediately instead of waiting till the end of the year to see the final results and then saying, oh man, I should have looked at this sooner. I could have changed the way I did this, change vendors, whatever. But also in that plan, create a plan to either, one, get out of debt if you're in debt, or two, set aside and create a savings account. I have a client that is growing rapidly. They're adding locations and all of this. He does a great job of planning his debt. He needs 3 vehicles that each cost, say, $100,000 for each expansion that he does. His bank understands what he's doing. He keeps them in the loop. They understand the need for it. They see his results. He shares the financials with them every month, that kind of thing. So he takes out a loan to buy the vehicle. And he's been doing this now. He's been on this growth cycle now for about 4 years. So as one of the trucks gets paid off, he continues to make that same payment amount, but applies it to the new truck. And so he's getting double payments on the new truck, allowing him to pay off the truck loan quicker than half as long as it normally was. So he's got this plan of growing and staying and reducing his debt. If you're already out of debt, then try to make it a plan to save, to create this rainy day or pandemic fund. Put X amount aside every month, every week, whatever, into a savings account, and either try not to touch it or use that instead of incurring debt. So our last topic overall is technology. I think the pandemic certainly amplified the value of technology. Technology is relied upon more now than ever. Most companies use technology that was already available to them, but they just hadn't fully deployed it. I use Zoom occasionally. Now it is my go-to. Again, back to the remote workers. I'm also a remote accountant. Instead of having my clients come into my office to meet for their monthly financial review, we'd make a Zoom call. Man, think about all the savings we're having. No one's having to drive. No one's having to spend the extra time, the mileage, all that kind of stuff. So I think that we're seeing more adoption of that with the cloud servers. We're seeing workforce productivity, like we talked about, where the workers are actually more productive from home than they are at the office. And I think part of this also led to management learning that it could trust its employees without having to micromanage them. I think that we're going to see a continuation of this. And we're going to rely more and more on technology. I know that we're doing some things to automate the entry of bills and the payments and things like that. It makes it more efficient, and we're not really necessarily doing it to save manpower. We're trying to expand our capacity. Because one thing we have figured out is even if we're going to use, people have always said that accountants are going to be the first to die with AI because, shoot, a computer can do everything we can do. Well, yeah, not really. And so, we found that maybe we have the capacity to do more if we're using these technologies, but there's still a need for human intervention. There's still a need for someone to review it, make sure it makes sense, that kind of thing. But there's also a need for social interaction. With all this technology and working remotely, we found that there's not the water cooler conversation that there used to be. People aren't meeting in the break room. Hey, what'd you do this weekend? Whatnot. And that loss was real. So there's a need for a social interaction between not just your staff, but also your clients and things like that. So I think that one thing I want to try and do is start having, a weekly video conference with everybody, and maybe have a little bit of it about business, because there needs to be some interaction there, but just also some of the, what are you doing this weekend type of thing, whether it's chat channels, video conferencing, and now maybe just a plain old happy hour, just to get everybody together and have a little interaction, because without the human connection, what is your business? There's a soul in your business, and you got to feed it. And then I guess I get to the final of, where do we go from here? I think some of the changes that we've seen are here to stay. For example, curbside pickup. I mean, who'd have ever thought that you could enter an order online to HEB and then drive up, call them, say, I'm here. They come and load your car and take off. That's wonderful. I mean, it's fantastic. And I think both parties have found that it works. The customer has huge convenience. They're not wandering the aisles looking for something. And the store is able to process more sales than they normally would. They process it on their own time. You know, they're not going to ring up those baskets when there's a long line. They'll ring them up when it's slow. So they're taking advantage of excess capacity, and it's creating a connection. I mean, you know, if you can do that with HEB, then why would you? And another grocery store is not offering it. If there was another grocery store in San Antonio, why would you go to the other one? It just makes sense, right? I think also the cleanliness and hygiene is going to stick. You know, the flu cases this year were way down, and that's because everyone's wearing a mask. Hopefully we can see some of that. You know, I don't know that we're going to wear masks forever, but I think there are times where it needs to. I actually think about in the restaurant kitchen, why are we not requiring masks there? I mean, we require hair nets, but we're not going to require masks. You know, after all that we've been through with this, you start thinking it's a little bit gross about somebody huffing and puffing as they're cooking your food. So I think some of this needs to stay around for a while. I know the building that we're in had additional cleaning services throughout the day. It was wonderful. I mean, our bathrooms look like Buc-ee's. It's fantastic. And I'm hoping that's not going to go away because we're on the other side of this pandemic. So that's my spiel about some of the lessons that we've learned. I'd like to open it up for questions and discussion. If anyone has anything, let me know.
Thank you, Brian. I do have a question. Maybe you can illuminate. So I know that a lot of your clients are in the restaurant hospitality industry, but you do have a handful of clients that weren't. I'm curious, was there anything that prepared certain people to maybe thrive? Or, I mean, it's probably an amalgamation of the stuff that you're talking about here, but was there anything that prepared folks to find an opportunity in the pandemic versus really be unseated?
I don't know that there was anything particular. I mean, the clients that thrived were construction. I mean, you know, people were now stuck at home looking at their house saying, man, I wish I had a pool, or this would be great if I could expand my bedroom, or I need to build an office onto my house. So construction went crazy. They did well. Some business services did fantastic. Health insurance brokers, for example, because that was one of the specific uses of the PPP fund. So nobody cut health insurance. That kept them rolling. And even within the restaurant industry, I mean, there were some lucky sorts. I mean, if you had a to-go window, you never saw your sales go down in 2020 compared to 2019. Most of them saw 10, 15, 20% growth even. But I think the people that were at a natural disadvantage when the pandemic started and then were able to successfully thrive in it were the ones that were agile. And I'll use Johnny Hernandez again. You know, Johnny went from having, probably 8-10 restaurants where all of a sudden all the dining rooms are closed. So he had zero revenue coming in. And he started getting down to the nuts and bolts. What do? We prepare food. That's what we do. We prepare food. So he started preparing food any way that he could see fit. 1, making these meal kits. 2, going to Meals on Wheels. 3, selling dinner kits. I mean, at one point they were offering dinner kits out of the Saw's parking lot. He took it another step further. People still want to drink margaritas. Nobody really wants to make the margaritas. He converted food trucks into margarita trucks and started delivering margaritas. So he's been adapting. He's doing a commissary now for a huge construction job, things like that. So I think it's taking that inventory of your capacities, your skills, what you have available, and being creative to come up with the idea of how can I deliver it to a different channel.
Thank you. Another question that I've seen come up is, so the sustainability of these new, call it lines of business. If you were predominantly just a restaurant or a bar before, and you didn't really focus on meals to go or delivery or drive-through or any of those things, but then you added that business line. You were talking earlier about how throwing some of your principles out the window in order to find that resiliency. How do you figure out what lasts and what doesn't last beyond as things become more normal, if you will?
Well, I think that part of that is, you got to monitor the results. One problem that we're having with that is when everything's shut down, a lot of people shut down their accounting department too, or they, the accountants were busy taking care of the funding and all the crisis management. So we've got to get to the point where we're getting those current financial statements and looking at the actual results of this, like the chicken wings. I mean, that you've got to keep up with it almost daily, or else you're going to get burned. So I think Johnny, for example, again, he was keeping his finger on the pulse, and he knew when it was time to quit being a mini grocery store and shift those resources elsewhere. One thing that I've seen that I'm curious whether it's really going to have a life or not is the new alcohol to go program. That has saved some bars. There are people that are making a lot of money right now on it. But that if you really just stop and think about the concept of that, I mean, we're putting mixed drink in a vehicle. Who can't see this as being a potential problem with the DWI that involves a fatality? So I think at some point, some of this stuff is going to come to an end. I mean, the first time there's a fatality because someone went through a drive-through margarita stand, I think that it's going to cause an uproar, and people are going to rethink how viable is this? How ignorant is this? Let's change this. So, did that help a little bit?
Yeah, it does. Another arena that I think has been really almost unfortunately sticky, if you will, has been the almost requirement of folks to join the app delivery systems. And I say it's unfortunate because the fees are astronomical.
Correct.
And really doesn't benefit. I mean, there's, I suppose, a benefit in awareness, or no. They say any revenue is good revenue. Some people say that, but what's your opinion on that? Or is there a best solution? I mean, maybe not best solution, but is it better to just do that in-house?
Yes, I try to dissuade anybody from doing that. The DoorDashes and all that of the world are pretty good salesmen. They go into the restaurant and they say, hey, we're going to do this, and it's only going to be 30% of the cost, and for that we're going to bring you business that you wouldn't normally have. Malarkey. I told one manager that was telling me that he was all excited because he thinks he can make extra money doing the third party delivery stuff. I said, all right, let me give you an example. If I come into your restaurant at 7:00 on Tuesday night and I say, hey, tell you what, I'm thinking about eating here, but instead of paying you $10 for that hamburger combo, I want to pay you $7. And I'm asking you to do that because I'm incremental business. I'm standing here at your place, but I could go next door. So if you want my business, sell me the hamburger combo for $7. What do you think the manager would say? He'd say, get out of here. I'm not going to do that. That's losing money. Well, why would we allow, a delivery app to do the same thing to us? So my thought, I always tell people, don't do it. In addition to giving up basically all your profits and then some, you've lost control of your product. If that delivery app takes 15 minutes extra to make the delivery, all of a sudden the French fries that you're delivering are soggy. The food's cold, or the hot food's cold, the cold food's hot. And they're not going to blame that on the third-party app. They're going to blame you on it. So why do all this? If you really think that your business has a viable delivery component, then I suggest they do the pizza model. Get the software, get the drivers, and you can make money that way. All the pizza delivery folks have proven that you can do that. Just don't outsource it. And it's really sort of crazy when you think about those guys, because the drivers on these third-party apps don't make that much money. In fact, if you look at the true cost and wear and tear on your vehicle, you're not making money doing Uber or anything else, or one of the food apps. The restaurant's not making money. The only thing that should be making money is a software company, but you look at that and they're not making money. Uber's never been profitable. Think about that. Uber's not making money. The drivers aren't making money. At some point, it's all going to fall. It's all going to crash at some point. But yeah, I do not like the delivery apps at all.
It's a really good point. I hadn't thought about the fact that nobody along the system is making money, but
yet the market says they're worth how many billions of dollars? Come on.
It's definitely an irony for sure. So in terms of preparing yourself, let's say that you're coming out of COVID and you're starting something new, is there some of these principles, if not all of them, will definitely apply to the formation around, getting yourself prepared. But is there anything that you would recommend that's maybe more inherent now in that planning or that building stage, or maybe as before it wasn't as key, or something you might have thought to put on the back burner?
Well, I think the economy has changed. I mean, if you're opening a new restaurant, you certainly want to at least strongly consider having a drive-through window, or a delivery system. Thinking about all the conveniences. If you're a retailer, how can you create it so that there's curbside pickup? What kind of do you as you're looking at what type of real estate do you really need? If you have an office space, do you really need that? Can you survive on an as needed conference room and everyone works from home? There are a whole lot of things to think about now that in the past probably we weren't that important, but now they're very important, and it's important that you look at it and see what's available. I'm thinking about my own office space, for example. Do I really need all this space? Don't know. If I had it all to do all over again, based on what we have, I'd probably have less space, less rent, more profit.
That also makes a lot of sense. And, in terms of, and we were talking about, I believe the number was 200,000 roughly businesses that are likely to go out of business, if not already out of business, due to the pandemic. There is sort of a trickle effect of businesses not able to operate, rents not being able to be paid, landlords perhaps being in a crunch themselves. So this is maybe more of a futuristic question, or, really I'm asking you to give a 2 cents on something that perhaps could be not very well known. But what do you see any issues that are likely to be presented in the next 6 months to a year based on, just some of that issue? I know, like, for example, supply chain, you mentioned with chicken wings is being impacted. Are there any others that you can foresee as points to consider along the road?
I think that we have a potential crisis coming up on real estate and debt. I guess this month is the first month that they're going to stop the forbearance on foreclosures. How many people that were displaced and unable to work are living in an apartment right now where they hadn't been able to pay rent for several months? What's going to ultimately happen there? So far, the bank has given the landlord some forbearance. The landlord's given the tenant some forbearance, but someone's got to pay the piper at some point. What's going to happen? And like I said, the government did that with the payroll tax deferral. I did that with my business. I mean, I couldn't charge my clients for work when they weren't open, but there was still work to be done. At some point, I hope that I can get some of that back. If nothing else, I hope that I've created a client for a lifetime. That's sort of the approach that you got to take on some of this is I'll create some tremendous goodwill. But yeah, I think that there are a lot of, I think there are going to be some other things that crop up as people just haven't been able to pay some of the bills in the past. I was surprised that Cisco and Benny Keith didn't have bigger financial problems because they were just like the restaurants. They had warehouses full of stuff and boom, all of a sudden the door came crashing down. They had no more sales. Restaurants weren't paying, or a lot of restaurants weren't paying their past due invoices to them because they were trying to hold on. Luckily, I think they've survived. So that part of the supply chain's okay.
Yeah, that's also a really interesting point you bring up. I hadn't really thought that level up, just the impacts that could happen to the distribution supply chain, especially in restaurants. And
yeah, I think too much about that. That's why I didn't sleep last year.
No, I understand. I mean, especially in your line of work, I mean, for multiple reasons, I can imagine you weren't sleeping. I can only imagine what the varying levels of tax deadline have done to you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think I spent more time last year being an emotional counselor than a financial advisor.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me see. I just have one more question, I think, and that is in terms of growing your business, and this is something that I actually saw a lot of people doing in the middle of the pandemic. And even though the environment may have seemed counterproductive, many people actually expanded their operations, built out larger patios, larger outdoor areas. And I'm curious, do you see that as an element of trying to survive, or did COVID just in some cases push forward the timeline for many businesses? And do you see that maybe being a great asset in that this kind of forced progress in some arenas?
Yeah, I think yes to all the above. I think initially, when you realize that you could not seat anybody inside and you had patio space, it just made sense to figure out how to open that up for seating. And the PPP funds helped that tremendously. And now the Restaurant Revitalization Fund grant specifically allows use of those funds to create outdoor dining. I think initially it was out of desperation, and it's what we've got to do. I think that it's here to stay. There's still a hesitancy among a lot of people to go inside a restaurant and be that close to people. I think it's going to take a while, even if the next variant of the COVID doesn't hit us or whatever. I think there's still just a little bit of after doing this for over a year. I think we have some built up resistance to mingling too closely all the time. So I think that they're, if I get the option and they've got a comfortable outdoor area, I'll sit outdoors. That's going to be the challenge in San Antonio. The patios have been wonderful since October last year through May. All right, now we're hitting 100 degrees. How are you going to make that how are you going to make that outdoor patio enticing for someone to sit there and enjoy? We've got to create a space. So there's going to be a lot of thought about how do we give it shade, how do we cool it, that kind of thing. Because the restaurants prior to COVID that were mainly outdoor did great business when the weather was comfortable. When it rained, it's hard to pay to keep open. So we got to create that environment so that it's stable and inviting.
Absolutely. And actually what you just said brought up another thought in my head, which probably I should have asked earlier, which is, although the pandemic, many people are saying it's this once in a lifetime event. And in some cases, I really hope it is only a once in a lifetime. I don't want to have to see it again, but there have been certainly other downturns economically, the 2008 housing crisis, probably post 9/11. There, many things were either a run on supplies or a complete shutdown of anyone wanting to do anything. And so I'm curious, do you see any parallels in terms of how business has changed, or does this seem so much more dynamically different than some of these other hurdles that businesses have had to overcome?
Well, I think that what made this one so impactful was that it affected everything. Every segment of business was affected some form or fashion. With the real estate crisis, it didn't affect everybody. 911, I was in the restaurant business at the time, and it was devastating. I mean, for a week or 2 weeks, nobody came out. If they did, they just wanted to watch CNN. Boom, boom, boom. But we got over it. This has been long. The Spanish flu is probably the most closely correlated, and it happened once in 100 years. I'm a little bit concerned that we're going to see this more frequently, just because the world's population is growing, and with means of travel and mobility, we're getting people moving around a whole lot more. When SARS, or the bird flu, hit Hong Kong in, when was that? 90 something. It was devastating to their economy, but they basically shut down everything and didn't have people flying into and out of Hong Kong and then taking it home with them. Think about what happened with COVID-19. It didn't take a whole lot of people to travel out of China to someplace to infect somebody, and then they travel, and the web just expanded, poof, and we had exposure everywhere. So I feel like we're probably going to be at risk for things like this in the future. And I think that, if you've got the ability, if you can create a plan for how to endure a pandemic or a shutdown. A lot of my clients said, this would be wonderful if I knew it was only going to be shut down for a month and we'd reopen in a month. Man, I'd be remodeling, I'd be painting, I'd be doing whatever. But I hesitate to do any of that, spend that money, because we don't know how long we're going to be closed. So I think that if you as you're doing your planning, you think, what happens if we have a 1 month shutdown, a 2 month shutdown? What happens if it's indefinite? I sort of think we opened too early. I mean, I felt like when they reopened in June, it was just about 2 weeks too early based on all the pandemic models and all that. And I hope one thing that we've learned is sometimes the the cure is painful, but it needs to happen. Had we stayed shut for eight complete weeks, I think it wouldn't have spread like it did. But I'm not Dr. Fauci, and I don't know everything there is to know about this, but it just seems to me that sometimes we're going to do this again, and we got to be prepared for it.
Awesome. Well, Bryan, I really appreciate you giving us this information. I know that it's extremely helpful to the community that we've shared it with, and we have it recorded as well for those that aren't able to watch right now, so we'll be able to share that out later. If somebody wanted to connect with you, either to continue this discussion or even learn more about what you offer, how would you best recommend for somebody to do that?
You can call me at 210-401-5744 or send me an email, probably preferably. And my email address is bpotts@thecfotogo.com. That's THECFO2GO.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bryan. I really appreciate your time. This was an extremely insightful conversation. I definitely feel like I know a lot of the folks that have been watching through the other mediums found it to be very valuable. So I can't wait to see you again in person. And also just hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.